So I'm now going to run through a few frequently asked questions about a prize audit and how this technology has been used through COVID-19 and beyond. So first, what makes companies interested in a prize audit? Companies are usually interested in a prize as they wish to combat the challenges faced in uncovering forced labour issues during direct worker outreach. So this usually takes place during social audit interviews. These might be language barriers, lack of training, lack of consistent data collection, privacy concerns, or any kind of lack of existing means to collect worker feedback directly. We've been told that companies find a prize audit easy to use and quite a simple tool to integrate into existing procedures. So companies don't need to completely overhaul their social audit approaches. They can simply use a prize as an additional tool in the belt of the social auditor. How do companies typically use a prize audit? So different organizations use a prize in different ways. As each organization has their own social compliance program, as does their approach of using a prize differ. Many find it useful to integrate into their standard auditing processes to identify those red flags wherever possible during audit. Some organizations don't necessarily interview workers as a standard process. So a prize actually created an entirely new worker voice collection element that otherwise didn't exist. Others had an existing process in place, but see this as an additional tool. Many companies are now using a prize audit as both an in-person tool and as part of their remote auditing processes too. Do companies inform factory management and suppliers that they will be using a prize audit? And how does this communication usually happen? Again, this really varies on a company-by-company basis. It's determined by a number of factors, including internal protocol, the actual relationship between the factory and the supplier, amongst other things. So typically we see the most successful communication where the factory management has a relationship with the brand and the communication is transparent and the supplier is really considered to be a part of the process and even taking ownership of that process. It's really recommended that the company or the brand involved is clear with their factories that a prize audit is simply a risk indication tool, and it's coupled with other issues or other approaches. So it may indicate risk, but it would be coupled with further investigation to investigate any types of risk that might be picked up by a prize. It's not saying hard and fast that modern slavery does exist in that particular location, but it can be a very useful tool to identify if maybe there are some issues or there might be something wrong within the workforce. How do companies incorporate the prize survey results into their decision-making processes? So in most cases, companies will use a prize to indicate whether a follow-up interview or a document check is required. So a prize is kind of like the first level of checking to indicate why there might be further investigation needed. In some cases, companies actually use a prize audit results to help inform the risk score of their own supplier if they have an internal risk segmentation. Do companies share survey results with factory management, and how does this usually happen? Yes, so typically companies would share the results of their interviews with factory management if a potential risk or a potential issue is found. It's designed to indicate risk, and it's really often seen as a very, very useful jumping off point to have some important conversations with suppliers to say, we found this particular issue, this is the data that we have, how can we work together to rectify this? No company that we interviewed as part of this process gives all of their suppliers automatic access to their assessment results, but rather chooses to share those results on a need-to-know basis. How many surveys or what percentage of the workforce does any one user undertake interviews for at each visit? Again, this is a personal choice. So some workers survey a higher percentage of some companies interview a higher percentage of workers, depending if the risk profile of that particular supplier or factory is higher. Some may interview a small handful of workers using a prize, and if they find there's a risk, they'll then widen that pool and interview more workers to see if the data being collected is meaningful. Do you find that a price audit increases or decreases the man hours needed per audit? This really varies. We've had a real split in opinion here from the companies interviewed. So some companies never really conducted interviews before starting a prize. So in this case, then time is often added on as a result of incorporating this new process. Other companies reported that a prize really saves them time, especially when using the QR code as part of those remote audits, because we're not having to battle with terrible internet connection, breaking down video, lack of access to video phones, and all of these other issues. What makes a prize audit different from other worker voice platforms or technologies? So a prize audit is really driven by the auditor. It was always designed to be a tool in the belt of a social auditor, be that an internal audit team or a third-party audit provider. It doesn't require workers to download anything on their devices. It doesn't require workers to self-identify that there's an issue. It's a very proactive tool. So it looks to be as simple as possible and really fit into the social audit process. Feedback that we've gotten states that it's very easy to roll out to multiple countries as the interface is very easy to understand and the results of the data are standardized. We also have the unique capability to deliver these interviews during the remote audit process in a seamless way. So again, by designing this technology to fit into existing audit processes, our approach with the remote auditing has had the same result. To understand the typical impact that a price audit can have, we analysed an anonymous sample of over 10,000 interviews. This sample includes data from October 2019 to July 2021. And the vast majority of these interviews were conducted when the COVID-19 pandemic was underway. This reflects the really sharp increase that we saw in price audit as a result of the pandemic, as many users started to really scale this technology in response to the challenges that they were facing. During the time of this data collection, a prize was being implemented in China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Turkey, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Sri Lanka, Nepal, India, the Philippines, and Jordan. 29% of the interviews that we conducted raised at least one indicator of forced labor risk, and the average number of indicators raised per interview where there was risk was 2.5. So if a worker is potentially at risk, typically they display more than one ILO indicator of forced labor at any given one time. And the chart on the screen here demonstrates the most and least commonly raised indicators across all of the interviews that we sampled. Typically, the workers in the sample set are factory workers working in clothing and sporting good manufacturing within tier 1 of the manufacturing process, so making the finished garment or the finished product ready for sale. In order to respond to specific risks to workers as a result of COVID-19, we developed an additional COVID-19 question set for the Apprise Audit platform. This anonymous question set included data from 700 worker interviews and covered a number of different COVID-19 related questions, including whether or not workers had received health and safety training on COVID-19 from their employer. We found that 75% of workers that we in this sample data set, 75% had not received specific training related to COVID-19 health and safety. We asked whether workers were facing restrictions on leaving their factory or dormitory due to COVID-19. 92% of our sample data set responded that there was some form of restriction on their movement in place. Now, this is probably to be expected as many countries, if not all countries, at one point had restrictions on movement for the entire population as a result of COVID-19. We asked workers whether they feel it's possible to safely social distance from others while in the workplace. 84% felt that they could not safely socially distance while at work. This might reflect the nature of factory work in many industries, but it could be identified as a key area of concern as it indicates that workers were put under pressure to put their own personal health and safety at risk in the workplace. We asked whether workers' pay had reduced due to COVID-19, and 85% felt that it had. This may be due to factory closures, supply downsizing, shrinking economies, amongst other factors. As production begins to return to pre-pandemic levels, it will be important to monitor to ensure that pay rates reflect this, and this could be a recommended course of action for companies interested in workers receiving fair pay as we come out of the pandemic. We also saw that 87% of respondents reported that working hours had reduced due to COVID-19. Similarly, this may be an issue that companies want to monitor as we start to emerge from the pandemic restrictions. Overall, we can see that COVID-19 really created a lot of challenges for companies and for workers in supply chains. Speaking to companies, we really wanted to understand how COVID-19 impacted their social audit processes, how they use technology, such as a prize audit, and what they learned through this pandemic. At the end of the day, 50% of the 12 companies that we interviewed stated that COVID-19 had not changed their approach to social auditing, but the other 50% said that it had. Many companies stated that relying completely on remote auditing is not their plan for the future, but they've said that they've learned lessons from these recent years that will inform their auditing strategies going forward. So this might include incorporating an element of remote data collection into their processes, incorporating technologies such as a prize audit, and creating a kind of hybrid audit program that includes both in-person and remote auditing. The majority of companies said that they are keen to incorporate more technology into these processes in order to make their social audit programs more efficient, more effective, and quicker to identify risk before it becomes a real issue. So overall, it appears that COVID has had a profound impact on companies' abilities to interact with workers across many industry types. The challenges posed by travel restrictions, lockdowns, unprecedented restrictions have been felt to a significant extent. This challenge, combined with the fact that the vast majority of workers' surveys using a prize displayed risk factors as a result of COVID-19, from restrictions on freedoms to decreasing pay. During a time when risk appears to be increasing, companies are less empowered to reach these workers and understand their conditions. In the long term, it remains to be seen whether COVID-19 has truly changed the modern slavery and social audit landscape forever.
This video was made possible through support provided by US Agency for International Development and produced by the Mekong Club and Winrock International. The opinions expressed herein are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the US Agency for International Development.